Good evening and welcome to the hashtag Snowpocalypse edition of Web 210 for February 12th, 2014. I hope that all of you are warm, safe, and sound this evening. In lieu of our standard in-person meeting this evening, I present to you all this series of short videos, much like we did the last time we had class canceled due to weather. The information I will discuss will cover the lecture we would normally have had tonight. Please be certain to read the accompanying chapter, which is Chapter 8, as well as come prepared with questions at our next class meeting. In order to be counted present, much like last time, I'm going to ask that you leave a comment in the assignment created for that purpose. I'll get that up sometime tonight, the 12th, or tomorrow, the 13th. Please be certain to leave that comment before our next class meeting time so that you can be counted as being present. So let's just talk about what we're going to cover this evening. This first video, we're going to actually not just talk about what to expect, but also talk a little bit about what you're going to need in order to follow the demo, and a brief overview and background on graphics and web design. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm also going to post a tutorial workthrough sometime in the next few days, probably over the weekend or so. It's normally something I would have gone over tonight in class after our lecture time, but since we aren't in class tonight, that's not something we have the opportunity to do. Hopefully this workthrough will provide you with some review in terms of how to take the information we've learned thus far this semester and apply it to a larger site. In this case, a fan site for Doctor Who. So let's get rolling. For these videos, the only thing you're really going to need are the demo files for Chapter 8. If you go to Moodle, it's going to say Graphics Demo Files. Go ahead and download those, unzip them, have them ready for all of the videos after this one. So let's get started. We're going to talk a little bit in this video about file formats when it comes to images on the internet. There are three main file formats. There are other types of file formats that are supported under particular circumstances. You've got SVG, which are your scalable vector graphics, and you can use them under certain circumstances. They're kind of an HTML5 kind of thing, and they're supported by most major modern browsers. You've also got a web format called WebP, and it's an image style format that was created by Google. See, notice the Google logo right there. It is not enjoying widely held support. Surprise, surprise. So we're not really going to talk about it a whole lot this semester, but be aware that it is something that's kind of lurking in the background, that's been around for a couple of years, and you never know what the future is going to bring in terms of support. I think if it can prove itself to be a viable alternative to one of the formats that's already in existence, and if the other browser manufacturers can get off the stick and decide to support it, I think we'll probably see some good stuff happen. But I wouldn't hold my breath for any time in the next couple of years. So the three main graphics formats you're likely to encounter on the web are the following: GIF or GIF, spelled GIF, JPEG, and PNG or PNG. You probably learned about these in Web 115, but let's just kind of go through them again real quickly, as well as I'll give you a couple quick demos so you can see what the differences are between the file formats. GIFs or GIFs are images with areas of solid color like logos. So for instance, we're looking at the Google logo. Now funny enough, it happens to not be a WebP or a GIF, it happens to be a PNG or a PNG, and we'll get back to that in just a second as to why that might be. But ultimately, things like logos are perfect examples of where you might choose to use a GIF. And they offer single color transparency. So for instance, if this Google logo were located on a black background or a white background, we could simply tell Photoshop, hey, make that background go away, and select the white, and we could save it as a GIF, and life would be wonderful. If you were to take this GIF and then save it as a JPEG, it would plug in the same color throughout the entire background. So be aware that that's kind of ultimately what a GIF does. It also can be used for simple animations, and some of those simple animations are becoming increasingly more and more complex. You quite possibly, with several of you being in the DME program, have had examples of seeing animated GIFs being used as a legitimate way of quickly implementing an animation that can be viewed on any device. Since it doesn't use Flash or anything like that, iOS devices and current Android devices can still support it. And the final thing is you can only have images, well rather, GIFs only display up to 256 shades. So understand that what that means is if you get something like a photograph, you're going to start seeing a degradation in the quality of the image, because photographs traditionally have millions of colors. And while you can use a GIF to kind of guesstimate what some of those are, when you start getting into things like the subtle differences of the 50 shades of blue located in a corner of the sky, you start losing some of that and the detail starts to get kind of wonky. We'll see an example of that later. Another main file format that you see quite a bit of is what's called a JPEG. JPEG short for Joint Photographics, or Joint Photographers Group, I believe, or Photographic Experts Group. They can be used to display images that have millions of colors, so they are most often used when you're talking about long photographs. They also use a technology called lossy compression, which basically means you've got an image. That image has got tons and tons and tons of information in it. That's what makes the image size so large. And when you use lossy compression, you take some of that information and you throw it out. The more information you throw out, the less information there is, the more likely it is the quality of the image is going to start suffering in a really visible way. Once again, we'll take a good look at that. An example might be, let's say, I suspect you have all read a book at some point that was 500 pages long, and when you were done you could summarize it in a single sentence and still contain and distill the essence of what the book was about. That's lossy compression. The last file format we want to talk about are what are called PNGs, and there are three different types of PNGs you might encounter on a day-to-day basis. One of them is known as a PNG 8, and that's really just sort of a pixel for pixel replacement for a GIF. It's got slightly better compression than a GIF, and so as a result your file sizes might be a teensy bit smaller. You might also find that if you've got browsers that aren't giving you full support for GIFs, as some of the modern versions, I've had a couple of issues every now and again with modern versions of certain browsers with GIFs. So if you're having trouble, try saving the images as a PNG 8 and you might find that you have greater success. That said, older versions of Internet Explorer do not support PNGs, so you've got to kind of weigh out your issues if you're running into them. There is also what's known as a PNG 24. And a PNG 24 is basically where you might use a JPEG. That is to say, it can support millions of colors, can give you really high quality in terms of your photography. The last kind is really kind of special. It's a PNG 32. PNG 32s are special because they support what's known as alpha transparency. Alpha transparency is a whole separate channel. So when you think of the color model that is generally used on the web, RGB, with the R being red, G being green, B being blue, each of those is its own individual channel. Now, if you have transparency and you can add it as a channel, that sort of gives you an idea of the strength of this idea of alpha transparency. Just like you can have differing amounts of red, green, or blue in any given segment in an image, you can have differing quantities of transparency. So as opposed to having an image with sections that are either transparent or not, you might have sections where the image is a little bit transparent and other sections where it's a little bit more or a little bit less transparent, and so on. And so that's what alpha transparency is. It's what, for instance, allows us to really soften the background behind a drop shadow, or have a bit of the background show through. PNG 32s support this. So imagine if you could have a photograph with sections that maybe had a little bit of transparency. That's what a PNG 32 offers you. The biggest issue with PNGs is that when you start getting to your 24s and your 32s, you're going to generally have a higher file size than a JPEG. So let me just do a couple quick demos for you in terms of images so that you can get kind of a side-by-side comparison. And when we're all done, we'll be all done. So we've got this JPEG image right here, and I'm going to go and save it. I'm going to reduce the size a little bit. I'm going to just say that I want it to be closer to 25%. Excellent. So you can see, just by virtue of bringing it in here in our Save for Web and Devices dialog that we have in Photoshop, we can see that the original is 1.14 megs, which is completely unacceptable for downloading on a website. And just by virtue of changing the quality of the image from maximum to high, it compresses it, gets rid of a little bit of information, and if you look up in the sky, you can see it's a little bit grainy, but it's not too bad. It's certainly passable. Most people wouldn't blink. And you have bumped the size all the way down to 94.22 kilobytes. So that's a pretty significant savings right there. Let's say that you wanted to just sort of see what this looked like as a GIF. Well, when we change it to a GIF, take a look at the sky again. You'll notice that there is greater degradation in the sky because there are literally probably hundreds of shades of blue in this sky area, and you've lost a little bit of it just by decreasing the quality, but you can really kind of notice it a little bit better. It looks really grainy, really pixelated. That's called dithering, and that's basically just Photoshop's trying to figure out a way of closely mimicking the sort of natural ebbs and flows in shades and tones that you have in a photograph. And so then you can see it mostly in the blues. Like if you look here, you can see that there's what looks like speckling, where here it's kind of a more smooth sort of thing happening. So, you know, if you look in various parts of the picture, you can see the dithering. It's worse in some places than others. And that's what changing a photograph to a GIF gives you. So you're generally not going to want to do that, even though you obviously enjoy a very nice reduction in file size. Let's go to a Ping 8, which, as I'd said before, is really similar to a GIF, and you can see that as a result you've got a really similar set of visual issues, where you've got heavy dithering in the sky and in this blue here on top of this playground structure. You've got a file size that's pretty similar to the GIF file size as well. If we go to Ping 24, which is a little bit more equivalent to a JPEG, you'll see that the dithering is once again reduced, but look at that file size, 706.4K. This would take over 2 minutes on a 56K modem. And even if you decide, well, we're not going to give that any credence, if we say, you know, cable, most people on cable aren't going to be willing to wait 8 seconds for a single image to download unless that is a really significant image. So, you know, you really want to be mindful of what's happening with your file sizes when you're working with web pages. All right, so let's go back to a JPEG, and as you can see, a JPEG is by far the best choice in this case. Okay, I'm going to cancel this, and I'm just going to take a look at this logo, which is a ping, just so once again we can kind of see what happens when we take something that's got a really really simple color profile and do some changes to it. Now, because of the orientation of this graphic, that changes what this looks like. Because it's a ping and has some transparency, when you decide to call it a JPEG, it's going to fill in the background with whatever color happens to be happening in your foregrounds and your backgrounds in Photoshop at the time. And so you can see that it's filled it in with a gray background. But the quality of the picture hasn't really altered significantly. But you do lose quite a bit with file size, which is nice. If we save it as a Ping 8, you'll see there's a little bit of graininess around the edges if you look really, really closely. But it's really not that bad. And you're talking about a significant reduction in download time, 3 seconds, with 9.162 kilobytes as opposed to 399 kilobytes. We changed this to a Ping 24. The sort of graininess around the edges smooths out quite a bit. Once again, this is the difference when you're talking about a lot of detail and being able to put a lot of information. It's still a really small file size, really fast download time. If I was looking to convert this ping for whatever reason or save it again, this is probably what I would do. And if we wanted to look at this as a GIF, once again, you'll see that the quality of the image pretty much looks the same. You're getting a little graininess around the O's again and around sort of the curved areas. Curves and sort of lower resolution don't really play together that nicely. You're not even looking at a significant savings in terms of file size. So chances are, if I was looking at a file format in this case, I would likely be looking at the ping still. And that's probably why Google made that choice. So hopefully that'll give you a slightly better idea of how all of that works. And just sort of for fun, I've got a couple of files here for us to look at. And that'll be kind of how I end this up. This is going to be an animated GIF for your enjoyment. Let's get this open in the browser.